Let's talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Guyana. This is the first time in 56 years that an Indian Prime Minister has visited the nation. As he arrived in Georgetown, the capital of Guyana, the Indian Prime Minister received a grand welcome from Guyana's leadership and the Indian diaspora there. In fact, Guyanese President Mohamed Irfaan Ali personally received him at the airport, and the two shared a warm hug as cameras captured the moment. So why is the Indian Prime Minister receiving such warmth in this part of the world? Why is Guyana important to India? What is its Indian connection? And what is the larger strategic and geopolitical significance of this diplomatic outreach? This is Shubhangi Sharma for CNN News 18. Let's begin.
Good evening. Welcome to the live launch of Oil Dorado, 10 years on. This is the 7th edition of this book. It's available in all good bookshops in America, in Guyana, everywhere else. Now, the very simple reason why Narendra Modi was in Guyana can be found in a 3-letter word. It's called oil. He'd come from Brazil and Nigeria, 2 other petrostates. India needs plenty of oil, and Guyana, Oil Dorado, is just the place to supply it. Guyana is the biggest oil find in South America in the last decade. They're already known to be 11 billion barrels in the Stabroek field alone. With adjacent fields and those in Suriname, there could be as much as 25 billion barrels in the Guyana basin. Oil is gushing out. Guyana is 10 years in, Suriname is just getting up to speed, Trinidad is rapidly decelerating as their oil runs out, and Venezuela is just frozen in time. Huge reserves, but locked in by US sanctions and a dictatorial government. So how much oil is there? Well, 11 billion in Stabroek alone, maybe 25 million. Oil Dorado is in pole position. Most of the oil to date it can be found in the Stabroek Block, offshore Guyana in the Atlantic. It's been developed by ExxonMobil and their partners Hess, maybe soon taken over by Chevron, and the China National Oil Corporation. There are at least 50 productive wells in the Stabroek Block, though that number increases monthly. More astonishing, the success rate in drilling those wells. 90% come up with oil. The industry average is 20%. The volume is equally staggering. The daily average this month is 608,000 barrels. The total for 2024 likely to be 215 million barrels. By 2027, it's forecast there will be 1 million barrels a day. That's 1 barrel a day per person of the population of Guyana. And it's quality oil too. Sweet Brent crude, much sought after in Europe. Cost of production 25 to 35 US a barrel, half or at worst the current world price of $70 a barrel. Guyana is a very profitable place to operate, but much of that goes to the oil companies. Guyana got a very bad deal in 2016 for their oil, just a 2% royalty plus 50% share of profit oil, which is much diminished by the oil companies loading in their costs, current and historical. Once that's taken out, the profit oil is put into the wealth fund. It's called a natural resources fund in Guyana, but much of that is withdrawn for current spending. This year, a staggering 96%. Still, the economy is booming. The GDP of Guyana has risen 43% in the first half of 2024. That's likely to continue. It will accelerate if the new franchises granted to small and large operators in blocks close to Stabroek come on stream in the next decade. We've got three special guests tonight: former President Sam Hinds, former High Commissioner Quinn, and Professor Terence Yhip. Sam, you're now the ambassador to the USA. What's the importance of oil to Guyana?
Well, thank you very much. For me, Exxon's discovery of oil off our shores was a matter for great joy for all of us Guyanese, because it provides an additional income for us to pay for the growth and development of our country and people that we so badly need. But let me say right away that without oil, the challenge before us, we would have met the challenge before us. And indeed, we had a great record of growth and development from 1992 without oil and with a great debt overhang. So I'm happy about oil. I welcome oil, but we could live, if there were no oil, we could have proceeded to grow and develop. I would say also that I have been in the area of natural resources, but at the same time, I have been aware that 2 of the countries that have grown most rapidly during the 70s, 80s and 90s were Japan and Singapore. And the Japanese used to say, we thank the gods that we didn't have any natural resources, so that we knew we had to work using our hands and our brains and working together as a team to develop our country. So I say the same thing, that people are most important finally. So whilst I welcome oil, and I'm happy for oil, I'm joyful about oil, oil is not all. We could have made it become oil, but we
oil
have
is
a
given,
good job with oil.
Oil has given the Guyana economy, just to the wealth fund, $5 billion in the last 6 years. 6 years. You used to be a borrower. You don't have to borrow. You're not a HIPEC country anymore.
Yes, yes, yes. I certainly welcome the oil and the money that comes from oil. And our government has been using that money to grow and develop our people and country, putting lots of money into education, growing education or the education for our people, growing the health services for people, and putting in maybe the first significant infrastructure for our people, the road from Georgetown through Linden and on to Lethem, something that was being advocated since the 1920s, so just about 100 years ago. We are being able to do many of these infrastructure development. We have been taking services to all parts of our country. We have about 220 villages across the hinterland. It's costly to provide them services, but we are doing that. We're putting it in because people are most important.
Are you happy with the deal you got from Exxon?
People.
Sorry, Sam. Are you happy with the deal you got from Exxon in 2016? Some people say it's crumbs off the table. You should be getting far more money than that.
I think one can always want more money, and one can spend a hell of a lot of time and get into a lot of arguments about which deal is better, which deal is worse. But I could tell you this, when we got into government in 1992, everybody, bilaterals, multilaterals, were coming telling us we're not giving enough to investors to attract them to come to Guyana. Why ask for 5% on gold? Why ask for whatever, so much on oil? They were all saying that. And then in 10-11, I don't know how many people remember that, but there was an occasion where it was felt that we would certainly hit oil. Oil was found off French Guyana at that occasion. Suriname looked good, but Guyana maybe looked the worst at that time. And then people came back telling me that, you know what, you can get some more. And I looked a bit askance, and they said, you would not break the contract. Contracts are ultrasank. But what would happen, you would reread the contracts, and you may find you don't have to give as much as you thought before. And I would have liked to show them the door. But I think we can get into too much arguments and waste a hell of a lot of time about it. And if you look at the discovery of this oil in Guyana, you would see that Shell pulled out 3 years before, and I presume Shell made a judgment on what was known at the time and thought that it didn't look as good as other places. And also it was said that there were 2 holes to drill at first, and it happened they drilled the right one, the one that found the oil, and then later they drilled the other one, and it was empty. So there's lots of risks involved, and who knows how it would have gone. Certainly, people who come after now into this basin, where there has been experience and there's greater knowledge and better modeling, certainly they can ask for more. But at the beginning, the question is, what was the right thing to do at the time? In fact, it was towards the end of the 90s when Dennison came to me. I was responsible for the GGMC at the time, and he said, we've been getting some interest in the far offshore, in the very deep far offshore, There was another company named, it starts with an A, I forget it now. And we were hoping to get 3 companies in on that far off strip, but eventually only Exxon took an interest in it or went ahead to enter into license, a petroleum license for exploration. And you must remember too, it was held up for quite a while, whilst we had resolved the issue of the borderline offshore with Suriname. So this thing, oil found in 2015, that immediate exploration began 96, 97, 98, or the approaches to the GGMC for that license began since about 96, 97, 98, somewhere in there.
If you'd been negotiating the deal, would you have got a better deal?
When? In 96?
No, 2016.
In 2015? Well, what time are you asking about? Today?
2016,
Today?
After when Raphael Trotman went to Texas.
I don't know the details as much. I know that generally, when you go into the first arrangement, generally you're constrained going down. There may be some room to maneuver, yes, but I don't know the details. I wasn't around for the details. I was around at the very beginning, and we used as model the agreements which had come out of both the UN and the Commonwealth Secretariat in the period in the 1980s. In the 1980s, I think we got some model agreements for forestry, for minerals on shore, and for petroleum licenses. We got model agreements from the UN and the Commonwealth Secretariat, and we began with the model agreement for the petroleum licenses.
Do you get many American companies coming to see you at the embassy in Washington saying they want to invest in Guyana?
I would say not that many. Many of them are into it. They work with Exxon and many others. There's an AmCham, and many others are going directly down into Guyana. There are a number that do come and say, yes, we are interested, and I pass them on.
Now, last question to you for the moment, Sam. You go back to Guyana frequently. What changes have you noticed in the last 10 years because of oil?
Let me say maybe my trading has been more to look at concerns and the boundaries and see how people are kept within the boundaries. And of course, I have my concerns are the usual story of the Dutch disease. Those are my concerns, but I see some other things that I'm happy about. In particular, our government's program of trying to utilize people who may not have much initial resources in doing work that helps themselves, say in particular, improving the streets and the physical surroundings in let us say, in the areas which have less income. I think our work to involve everyone in the growth and development of our country is something that I'm very hopeful about.
Skyscrapers, cars, corruption?
I think anyone can allege corruption, and certainly we have challenges in people's customs and practices and attitudes. I guess people's feelings about what is right and what is wrong. I would say growth and development is a total process. It's a total process. I have not lost faith in our people. In fact, I have great faith in our people, particularly with our PPPC in office. I have great faith in our people and our future.
We'll come back to you, but let's go to an observer, somebody who's been in and out of Guyana for the last 10 years. Greg Quinn was the High Commissioner to Guyana, probably one of the best ones in recent years, and now goes regularly to Guyana to do various bits of consultancy. Greg, what's changed in the last decade?
Thank you, John. I mean, I think, frankly, I mean, to my view, what's happened in the last decade has been nothing short of spectacular. You know, Guyana was the second poorest country in the region when I first arrived in 2015. Now it's the country with the fastest growth rates in the world. You know, all driven by oil and gas discoveries. You know, currently what, about 11 billion barrels of oil equivalent. And to be frank, you know, in my view, in 2015, Guyana was stagnating. Growth was sluggish, standards of living were poor, opportunities even less. I mean, let's not forget 80% of those who had tertiary degrees left the country and never came back. You know, more Guyanese citizens were living in the US and Canada than were in Guyana. I mean, the world now in 2024 is somewhat different, to put it mildly. You know, and the evidence of that is obvious to anyone who looks at the skyline of Georgetown, but also anyone who looks and travels outside of the capital and sees the roads, the stadiums, the schools, the hospitals, amongst many other things that are being built the length and breadth of Guyana. You know, and then we have the explosion of the number of cars on the road. You know, an unfortunate side effect of that, of course, is the increasing and obvious level of disobedience of basic road rules by all drivers. But, you know, that's a separate discussion, I suspect. You know, and oil and gas in reality has saved Guyana from a dependence on others. You know, Guyana doesn't need to go to the international community or the lending banks for money. It has the money itself. You know, that doesn't mean all, to my view, that doesn't mean all is rosy in the Guyana garden. I think there are some pockets of society who don't appear to have benefited from oil wealth, or at least who don't think they've benefited from oil wealth. You know, some parts of society still feel impoverished. You know, the cost of living has jumped as goods and services have become more expensive. And the lack of people means that getting workers across all sectors of the economy is becoming increasingly difficult. So to that point, in my mind, you know, there needs to be a nationwide conversation about immigration, because the reality is at the minute, whether there's 750 or 800,000 people in Guyana, and I know there's an argument over the exact number, that simply doesn't provide enough workers to fill every job. Ultimately, I do not have time for naysayers. You know, I'm by definition an optimist. I'd never have gone through the elections in 2020 if I hadn't have been. Yes, there are problems. Yes, there are issues such as accountability, but I do not believe oil and gas is a curse for Guyana. Oil and gas is a blessing, and a blessing that every Guyanese should welcome. Yes, the world is moving to other sources of energy to address climate change, but the reality is oil and gas is going to be here for a long, long time. This is not just about energy and power. It's about providing the things that allow us to live safe and comfortable lives, be that the plastics we rely upon, be that the clothing that we rely upon, be that the medicines. The idea that we can turn oil and gas off overnight and keep living as we do is sadly a delusion. So Guyana must ultimately make the most of this gift. That means ensuring oil and gas production continues for as long as possible. It means making use of the gas, not just re-injecting it into the field, but turning it into cooking gas, using gas to power, gas to liquids, all of which is within the government's plan. And, you know, fundamentally, you know, the Guyana of 2024, as I've said, much changed from the Guyana I first saw in 2015. You know, yes, I don't underplay the challenges of integrating and dealing with a large influx of wealth, but I do fundamentally believe that Guyana is in a better place than it was. Interestingly, a non-Guyanese friend of mine once asked why Brits always moaned and complained about things when compared to his own country. We had a good health service, we had good schools, we had good infrastructure, all things his people dreamed of. He wondered where the pessimistic British view of their lot came from. I told him we just like to moan. You know, in many ways, I see similar traits developing in Guyana, where some focus on the negative. That's wrong. People focus on the positive. You know, ultimately, John, maybe Guyana and the UK aren't that different after all.
So have the Guyanese bought into oil, do you think?
Not everybody has, John. I think if you look at some of the NGOs, if you look at some of the commentary, there's a focus on it being a bad thing. People focus on the environmental impacts and such like. And I don't want to underplay the environmental impacts. And there's ways in which those need to be mitigated. But I frankly think it is unfair and inappropriate of people to say Guyana and Guyanese people should not benefit from something. This is a gift to Guyana. It allows them to develop the infrastructure, the social services that would not otherwise have been able to do. And who is anyone to tell Guyana that it should not take that chance? To do that is, frankly, in my view, patronizing.
I mean, there's at least one newspaper which attacks Exxon day after day after day, and some people who say leave the oil in the ground. You know, Guyana doesn't need.
John, Exxon's a company. It's there for, you know, it's a business. It's not a social enterprise. It's not an NGO. Now, as the ambassador said, you know, in 2015, before oil was first discovered, it was not a sure thing. As the ambassador said, Shell left. Shell left, and even when Shell left, Exxon did not want to go alone by themselves. They brought CNOOC in to the whole thing. So this idea, hindsight's a wonderful thing, John. But even when I arrived in February of 2015, Guyana and oil was not a sure thing.
If you go back in 10 years' time, what would you expect to see in Guyana?
I'd like to see a better public transport system, but that's a different thing. I think, you know, I would hope and expect to see government expenditure which is focused on the people. That means social security. That means healthcare. That means education. That means infrastructure.
Not roads and bridges.
No, that's infrastructure. Roads and bridges are part of that.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think, you know, the real benefit to people is seeing both the amenities, but also their social well-being improving. And to be fair, you know, the government is building hospitals, it's building schools. And I think that, you know, that needs to continue. But fundamentally, the government also needs to sell to people and sell to the population how everybody is benefiting and making sure everybody feels that they are benefiting, because I don't think that's the case at the minute.
They're not doing that very well at the moment, are they?
Well, how they're doing it, it's the recipients, the people who are on the receiving end of it. Not all of them think that they are benefiting. And I don't understand why, you know, maybe there's a bit of work to be done on why that is and what is not being put across in the messaging that should be.
From today, everybody's getting 50,000 Guyanese dollars. It started today.
100,000, John. 100,000.
100,000, sorry, yeah. No, I think, is it 50,000 per person, isn't it?
No, 100,000 per adult.
Per adult, over 18. Surely that'll go to them, that oil means something to them.
Yeah, now we could get into a debate as to whether or not handouts like that are good. You know, Guyana is not the only place that does it. But, you know, it's a clear indication of people should be seeing a benefit and should see, okay, I would not have had this but for that oil funding or that oil money.
There's an election next year, and some people might say that that's an election bribe to give everybody cash in hand.
You think people in November 2025 are going to remember something that happens in November 2024 when it comes to an election? Look at our own election, John. Do you think anybody remembered anything that the Conservative government might have done the year before? By that stage, they'll have well forgotten. They'll be thinking about whether I'm going to get 200,000 next year before the election, not 100,000.
Let's move on if we can. Professor Terence Yhip, you were born in Berbice, became a banker, a professor of economics. Now you've actually studied the figures for the diaspora. You know, there's this great feeling that the Guyanese will all flock back to Guyana to work. Is that true?
Well, let me start with something. Back last year in August, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are saying Guyana lacks something like 100,000 skilled workers. It's an estimate. And part of the effort to get 100,000 people was to attract the diaspora. So I was looking at the numbers and I said to myself, well, does Guyana really have 100,000 skilled people to return to Guyana? And when you look closely at the numbers, you'll probably be lucky if you get a few thousand willing and ready to go back. So I wouldn't bore people who are listening to me with statistics because it's all there in the article in your new version of Oil Dorado. But let me quote a few numbers. When the Ministry of Home Affairs made that announcement, they said there were some 550,000 diaspora out in North America, England, and what have you. And in the next year, that was in summer this year, they arranged a job fair in LaGuardia, and Sam would know would speak more about that. And the whole idea was to entice Guyanese to get back to Guyana. The thing is, if you look at the 500,000, that's a very inflated number, because to begin with, it includes a lot of retirees and people on pensions. And if you strip out that amount, that number, and just look at the working age, that is prime working age, 25 to 57, you get a much smaller number, like 250,000, which is a vastly smaller number.
Okay.
And if you then make further assumptions that it's not individuals who decide to go back to Guyana, but households are making these joint decisions, then you have to not look at individuals, but at households. And if you make some reasonable assumptions, I mean, you could check it back in my article, you'll get something that even less than that, which is like 135,000, much less than that. Question then becomes, of that 135,000, and this is global now, of course, most of them are in New York State. The question then becomes, of that number, how many would be willing to get up and leave, pack up, go back to Guyana? And then the question then you have to ask is, would both the head of the house or the husband and wife, what's the probability that both of them would agree or be highly ready to leave, sell out, uproot their families to go to Guyana and work, presumably for a long time? And when you work out the maths, it's not very positive. Because, I'll give you an example. Let's say John Mair is willing today to go back to Guyana, but his partner says, zero, I'm not going back. The probability of both of that joint decision is zero, 100% times zero. So anything less than 50% reluctance, you can see how substantially that probability drops. Now, I don't have figures of how many people, migrate or remigrate, but I looked at the numbers recently, and that's based on that job fair in LaGuardia. Stabrook and the newspapers report that 300 people registered for that job fair. These are registered people. They're not attendees necessarily. Well, let's buy the argument that 300 people attended. What's 300 people in a place like New York? New York has 140,000 Guyanese, just New York. The whole of America is like 250. 300 is like a quarter of 1% willing to go back to Guyana.
So what's the realistic number then?
So the realistic number would be, if I had to put some faith in the numbers, it would probably be a few thousand, and not in one jump. It would be kind of over a period of years as people digest what's going on. And this is important because think of it. People are uprooting themselves. They have kids go to university. They're building wealth. They're building careers. They're going to a place which is, for our practical purposes, unknown. They're going back into high crime, high road accidents. You have mosquitoes in the villages. It's more than I can ever recall. I'm sorry to say that, Mr. Hinds. Safety is a concern. Security is a concern. So these are all heavy fixed costs to overcome. And that's why I think a few thousand might would be on the optimistic side. And this is global.
Okay, let's move on if we can. Are you going to read my book, great Terence? Are you planning to go back to Guyana?
I would like to go back, yes. Sorry for some time. I'm not sure how long because I have my family here, and that's it's a recognition of the reality. Um, Certainly.
Have you offered to go back?
Pardon?
Have you offered to go back to Guyana?
I haven't asked anyone in Guyana to serve. I've written extensively about the challenges. I have a book out called From Rags to Riches, and I have a book out now on the challenges facing the Caribbean. And I focus 2 chapters on Guyana for good reason. That one of the chapters focus on the sugar industry. Mr. Hinds would know that our sugar industry is in a coma for decades. And the problem, I'm going to stay away from the politics, but just focus on the economics. It could be solved. Guyana could have a profitable sugar industry. It will have to be reorganized, and it will have to follow very strict technical requirements. I don't see that at the moment because it's being inhibited by, as I'm saying, other factors.
We're going a bit off piece there. Let's look at the effect on housing in Ghana. We're going to play you in a little video of how the oil boom has helped people in housing in Ghana. Let's have a look at this, and then we'll get on to the Wealth Fund.
The economy of Guyana has grown by almost 50% in the last year. So this is a significant supercharging effect that oil has had on Guyana's economy. Capital expenses, I think, grew by about 107% last year. They're building a lot of roads and a lot of houses. So especially housing developments and things like that. There's always been a backlog of people in Guyana who've wanted to build houses, but there just hasn't been the infrastructure. So someone might want to build a house, but there's no electricity hookup or sewage service. So now the government is building new residential areas, paving the way with the infrastructure that's needed for that. And so there's a lot of people building houses.
There we are. That's one effect of the oil. Now, any sensible petro state should save for a rainy day, but put it into a wealth fund. Guyana has about 2 decades of oil from the current finds. The royalties are huge, despite the bad deal. So as of September this year, $5.4 billion has been paid into the Sovereign Wealth Fund. They call it a Natural Resources Fund in Guyana, from ExxonMobil and partners. And it's held in the account of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and governed by a board headed by the impeccably honest Brigadier General Joe Singh. Every quarter, the fund is added to by the oil companies. But this government, which has been in power since 2020, has passed laws that allow them to go to the Guyanese Parliament regularly to seek top-ups to the consolidated fund, the current spending account. They use what they call development projects, a new Demerara Harbour Bridge, another one of the Berbice River, 4-lane highways, roads for remote communities, the ambassador is speaking about this, new hospitals, schools, and house lots with population. More recently, cash handouts, from today, 100,000 Guyana dollars per person. That's about £300. In reality, the Wealth Fund has become a piggy bank for the Minister of Finance, Ashley Singh. This year, Guyana is expected to draw on 96% of the funds deposited this year. Rainy days seem far from their mind. Ambassador Hinds, is this a sensible use of a wealth fund?
Yes, I certainly think so. I think we had our Vice President, Mr. Jagdeo, speaking to this sort of question quite a long time ago, and he pointed out that the point was made that maybe Norway was putting a greater portion of their money into savings, but the point was made that we have to fit the situation to where Guyana is. Guyana had more or less very little. I would not want to say near zero in terms of a lot of infrastructure and utilities, schools, and so on. So we need to spend the money rapidly now to improve our people. Growth and development is finally an issue of getting people, growing the people of the country, and we're making all efforts. to grow the people, provide them better education, better hospitals, provide infrastructure for economic activity, for the people's economic activities from the villages to the Georgetown, our capital. We're working all across Guyana.
But if in 5 years' time the wealth fund is empty, what use is that?
I don't think the wealth fund would be empty in 5 years' time. And I think if it is empty and it has been utilized in growing people and country, then it has been well spent. And I have full confidence that our government is spending the money wisely and properly.
But you can't eat roads and bridges, Sam.
Yeah, but you can use them to earn. You use them to earn. You know, we're in a position where people also claim that the government is following a program of bread and circuses like the Romans. You know, you're in a position where you're damned either way. You're damned either way. On the one hand, you hear you're not giving people enough. On the other hand, you hear you're giving people too much. You're developing a culture of bread and circuses. So, you know, which is it? The fact is that we are in a period of rapid growth and development. There's so many things that need to be done in Guyana, and there can be so many criticisms about which one is done first and which one is done second. But our government is there to get on with the program, and we are getting on with the program for our people and country.
Greg, you share that view?
I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for what the ambassador says. I mean, personally, I'd like to see a bit more money sitting in the Natural Resources Fund. And I say that as someone who comes from a country who never had a sovereign wealth fund, and we spent all the bloody money we got out of the North Sea. And I think now we're regretting it. But having said that, you know, the ambassador is correct. You know, you need to spend to develop. And, you know, that's fine. I'd like to hope in 5 years' time, we're not in that same sort of situation where so much of the resource fund is being spent and more of it is actually being put away for the rainy day that will eventually come. And let's be in no doubt, rainy days do always come. So I think, you know, personally, I'd like to see a bit more going in it. I understand why it's being spent. Let's spend it now. Okay, fine. But let's start putting more of it away, you know, in the next year or two. And to be fair, you know, the money that's coming out is being replaced in oil. The production's going up. So with production going up, then there's more money going into the resource fund.
Could I just add something there? You know, I think there should be a balance. If think of a country like Nigeria, they've been pumping oil probably close to over $1 trillion since 1970s. And there's not very much in their wealth fund. In fact, they are borrowing more than they're putting in. You look at a country like Trinidad, they only have about $6 billion in their wealth fund. And now look at the challenges now in Trinidad. They urgently need funds to restructure the economy. What is $6 billion? It's roughly about probably a few years of imports for goods and services. So I think Guyana has to be very careful how they're spending that money. They should have a fiscal rule which says that X must be in that fund per year. And unless they do that, I could see challenges ahead if indeed the world is moving to greener energy. I could see oil and gas prices probably peaking at some point and then falling. It could easily go the way of sugar in Guyana. And they have to be very careful not to raid that piggy bank.
Really, Terence, I mean, you know, the price of oil producing $25 US, and the world price is $72 at the moment. It has to plummet an awful lot, doesn't it?
You know, it could go to zero. You know, a few years ago that happened. Think of 2008 or 2013 when the oil prices collapsed. It went to negative. And I could see in a scenario where the global economy is moving to green energy, and that's a trend. I don't think it's reversible. Oil prices are not going to keep rising forever. It's the more fossil fuels will come on stream, and oil could go the way of sugar. In the case of Guyana, what is 11 billion of reserves? You know, that's nothing. It's really not, it's a drop in the
I
bucket.
think, I think our reserve has to be our people. As I said at the
I think
beginning,
you're absolutely right, Sam.
I have been most impressed by what the Japanese have been saying in the 70s and 80s. We thank God that we didn't have resources, and we realized and accepted that we got to use our hands and our head and working together as a team.
Sam, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you.
Maybe I'm an old Puritan. Maybe I'm an old Spartan Puritan, but that's
No, I think you're correct, because, and that kind of dovetails with what I'm saying in my piece. The diaspora should not be the only focus. It should be an immigration policy that is broader for skills and number. And it has to be done carefully, of course, and you can't rush it. And I absolutely agree with you. The long-term growth of Guyana is people, not the oil. It's when they acquire the skills and that entrepreneurship, the know-how, the skills. That is what determines growth. And that explains Singapore, it explains South Korea, it explains all these countries that are very poor in natural resources.
Yes. So
what about manufacturing industry? Should they be developing that far more?
They should, but they need the population. That is why they have to have a well, thought out immigration policy, so that we have a population base. Let me give you an example. If they're going to, let's say, produce X, we only have about 800,000 people in Guyana. That's not a big base to do mass, assembly line mass production. You need to export it. If you have more people coming in, that helps. But as Mr. Hinds is saying, if you have good productive capacity, you're competitive, then Guyana could export that stuff to other countries. So whilst it's true, we need a market size, you need a very competitive economy, and for that you need skilled people.
Sam, is Guyana on the way to that? Is it skilling up the people? Is it?
We're not. I don't think it's a question of us being ready. We certainly haven't had our history where we're coming from. We're getting there. We have to keep working at it. Quite often people say Guyana doesn't have this, Guyana doesn't have that, and I always said, the problem is that we don't have it. We have to build it still. We have to put the road in. Guyana doesn't have roads because roads were never built. We got to build the roads. If Guyana doesn't have good electricity, it's because we always lagged. The money was never invested. The required money was never there to be invested in electricity. We have to put it in. Guyana is a country that is being built in the very early stages of growth and development. Its people also are in early stages of growth and development. The challenge is to sell them this message that eventually it's our work, the work of our hands and our heads, and working together as a team, that is what matters. And it's difficult to sell them in the context of lots of oil and many of the things that people are saying. For me, there's been a great focus on we should be getting more from Exxon. And I've written saying, what I would like my people to be concerned about in Guyana and oil is look back and see where they came from. Look and see that maybe in the 1870s, people in Pennsylvania were pushing pipes into the ground where oil was oozing up and trying to catch it. And that is where they have come from in maybe 1850s, 60s, something, to where they are today. In 1996, when Exxon first came far offshore, there were maybe one or two companies that would could work in that region. Exxon and I think Andarco was another one that was around that might have had the kind of capability. I want my people to be challenged by how the oil industry has grown and how all things have grown. If you look at airplanes, the Wright brothers, where we were in 1903, I think, or sometime very early then, and if they go to the museum, they'd see that step by step, how it has advanced. And I want my people to feel challenged that that is the way we have to go also. We could do this today. Maybe we could build a donkey cart today, but tomorrow we build something better, and the day after we build something better. Yeah, that's the way I want my people to see life. And
Greg, you want to come in there?
Life.
John, I was just going to say, Terence is spot on immigration. There needs to be a really sensible discussion of immigration. And the first part of that needs to be done is getting over the political suspicion that will exist. If under a PPP government, people from country X come in, there will be suspicion as to why people from country X are coming in. If people under a PNC or APNU government come in, it's a suspicion as to why they're bringing in those people. We need to get past this political suspicion about why immigration is necessary and focus on why immigration is necessary, which is there are simply not enough people in Guyana of working age to do what the manufacturing, as the ambassador and Terence say, to do agriculture. The president talks about agriculture and Guyana becoming the breadbasket of the Caribbean again. That takes people, so we need to get past this political suspicion about immigration and why certain groups are coming in, because yes, Terence is right, the diaspora is not going to fill that gap, and just focus on bringing in the right people to do the jobs that need to be done.
Absolutely.
Let's move on, if we can, to another tricky subject. Venezuela, the neighbor to the west. I mean, they've claimed much of the west of Guyana of its own. If you look at the map, you will see it's 2/3 of the territory they want. Look at the hatched area for that. It's thought to have been settled in Guyana's favor by international agreements, but not for the leader of the Bolivar Republic, Nicolas Maduro. After a sham referendum in 2023, he renewed the claim. That had to be settled by a peace deal brokered between the two presidents in St. Vincent last December. That peace remains uneasy. Now, Greg, you have a position on Venezuela and Guyana.
Fundamentally, John, this was settled in 1899. It is still settled in 1899. There is no question about that. What the Venezuelans have referred back to are the comments of Prof. Mallet, who was so confident in what he said, he would only let it be published after he died and he couldn't answer any questions about it. My view, so there is no question in my mind that territory is legitimately Guyanese. And let's not forget, Guyana gave up territory as part of 1899. And by the way, Venezuela illegally occupies part of Guyanese territory subsequent to 1899. So I think that's a fundamental part. My concern about what happened in St. Vincent is that by going to St. Vincent, and I understand why the president did it, by going to St. Vincent, he gives an impression that there is a discussion to be had bilaterally when there is no discussion to be had. This is in front of the ICJ as well. There is no bilateral discussion to be had. And for the good reasons that he went, and for the reasons that some pressured him to go, I suspect, he's given an impression that there is a discussion and a negotiation to be had when there very clearly isn't, because that border is settled and nothing has changed since 1899.
If you were advising him, you would have told him not to go, wouldn't you?
Yeah, if he'd have asked, that's what I would have said. I don't know what other people said. I would have said, obviously, people told him to go. But I think, fundamentally, Maduro is a dictator. And you do not appease dictators because it doesn't achieve anything. They just take and move on and try and take some more. They are not to be trusted and they are not to be relied upon. I wouldn't believe a word Maduro says, frankly, about anything. And his actions since St. Vincent, John, have demonstrated that, because the agreements and the discussion that were made as a result of the discussions in St. Vincent, he's gone and ignored anyway by declaring sort of Guyana Essequibo or whatever. So why bother going in the first place?
Is the peace deal holding, Greg? Is St. Vincent holding?
As far as I'm concerned, St. Vincent may as well not exist because it's irrelevant to the discussion, because this discussion was settled in 1899.
Ambassador Hinds.
But in terms of, is Maduro Guyana is adhering to everything. Is Maduro adhering to it? Well, clearly not, because he's pushed through this Guyana Essequibo, where everybody there is now Venezuelan, regardless of whether they want to be or not.
Except he hasn't invaded.
He hasn't got the capacity to invade.
Now, Sam, if you were president, would you have gone to St. Vincent?
I must say I don't know enough about the occasion, but I can tell you this. You know, for quite many years, Chavez was saying, I think quite publicly, many people would have heard him say that resurrecting that story when Guyana was becoming independent was all politics, the politics of the moment. And Chavez said, as a soldier, he himself, he did take part in the planning to recover Guyana and all of that, but he knows it was just a matter to keep a door open to go into Guyana, whether it was Jagan being on the left and later on Forbes becoming communist, to keep a door open, so that at that time the government in Venezuela that was more aligned, or believed they were more aligned with the government in America, they kept the door open. They kept the door open. It was a matter of keeping a door open into Guyana. Unfortunately, it was taught to the people of Venezuela, and it seemed to have become part of much of the population at the same time. So we have an issue to deal with, and we have our faith in the ICJ process. And we know that we've heard a number of political forces in Venezuela say that they would abide by the ICJ, the outcome of the ICJ process.
If Venezuela invades, will America put troops on the ground, boots on the ground, or planes in the air?
I think we could do lots and lots of speculations, so I would not engage in that speculation.
What are you reading though from this government?
I am hoping that things would stay as they are. The Venezuelans wouldn't come over the border, and eventually the ICJ would rule. And I hope that the Venezuelans would live by the ruling. We're committed to living by the ruling, and I hope that they will also live by the ICJ ruling. That's my.
Will the UK put boots on the ground if Venezuela invades? And what's the UK's long-term strategy there?
John, I'm not in the UK government anymore. I'm not privy to what they're thinking.
Right.
For better or for worse.
But you said the gunboat, gunboat came to Georgetown. I just wonder, who would defend Guyana?
John, that ship's in the Caribbean. There's a ship in the Caribbean all the time. It travels down to Guyana regularly, and to the region regularly. It undertakes exercises. I wouldn't read too much into the fact that it came down in that timing.
All right, we're coming to an end now. Let's do a little sum up. Good or bad for Guyana oil. Terence, do you think ultimately good or bad?
I think it all comes down to management of the resource. As Mr. Hinds said, oil is a means to an end. Greg as well emphasized that it's a means to an end. It's not the end. How Guyana uses that oil in their infrastructure that they're doing now, and not only that, to educate the people, develop their skills so that they can then run factories competitively and actually compete. Because think of it, John, the world has changed. This is no longer Booker's, right? And Demba. We are in a knowledge intensive economy now. Knowledge is the key to everything now. So you need talent. Where would Guyana get the talent? Well, as I try to argue, and I think I'm correct, we cannot depend on the diaspora. They're not there. The numbers aren't there, either in the numbers or the skills. So we need to educate people. We need to attract immigrants. And if they could use that oil money as a means to develop the economy, starting with agriculture, and then building secondary industries, and with the gas to shore project to produce energy, I think the future is bright. But again, it's a big if. It comes down to the politics, the ethnic problem, and macroeconomic stabilization. They could mess up the economy if the cost of living goes out of control. People are not going to buy into development, and so it's a lot of pieces have to fall into place then.
Greg, what's the worst case scenario for Guyana?
What for Guyana? Well, the worst case scenario is Equatorial Guinea. I don't see that happening. The important thing here is, as Terence and the ambassador have said, is, you know, the money that oil provides is used to develop and build a country and build an industry, be that agriculture, industrialization, which allows Guyana to continue to develop long after oil finishes. And that's the key, to make sure that is done and that industry and agriculture is built to ensure Guyana is not dependent on the Dutch disease of oil or gas.
Ambassador Hinds, what's the future for Guyana?
Well, I'm hoping that we would use oil as a means to an end. From the very beginning, we have a program of using oil for a better life after oil, because we have been very much aware of climate change and the need to end the use of fossil fuels. And so we have been running from the time oil came along, we've been running to use oil to ensure a better life for people after oil. I think for me, the most important thing is to get the message to people that when we think of empowering ourselves, we're thinking of ourselves becoming good surgeons. And the only way we get there is we got to make the years of study to get there. Or we're thinking ourselves as a great lawyer. We got to spend the years to make ourselves into great lawyers or great engineers or so on. So it is a challenge for us. We no longer have the excuse that we aren't educated or we aren't this or we aren't that because we don't have the money. In fact, it's like the Bible says somewhere, oil has removed the cloak that we Guyanese might have been hiding under before. Now we're put to the test. We have to make somebody. We have to make good people of ourselves.
Mr. Hinds, Sam, here's a question. You studied in Canada, and
Yes.
And I know you from that through connections. Can you see Guyana going through that change in mindset of the kind of the level of responsibility, the work ethic that you saw in New Brunswick, and all of us who have studied abroad? Do you see that spreading, diffusing throughout Guyana?
I think we can. I hope we can.
To me, that's the secret.
I recognize that the social political situation challenges it very, very much, but I'm very hopeful. I'm sorry that we don't have Shady Jagan about at this time of our national life, because he had the standing with people, with a large number of people, to be able to take the message that most of all, we have to make good people, productive people, caring people, courteous people of ourselves. For example, when I come here, I see at some junctions, four-way stop. Everybody stops, and the person who stopped first is allowed to go, or it goes first. And we read about maybe road mayhem in Guyana. That seems to be the kind of picture you're getting, where everybody's hustling and jostling. We have to bring about these changes. I think it can come. I think it can come, but it's difficult. It calls for some sets of people to take on the job, maybe a thankless task, a task for which there is no pay, to bring about the change. I am regretful that a lot of our skills is being put into sarcasm, and lots of sarcasm about our people and our country. And I think it's most despicable that people are using their talents in that direction. And everyone knows who I'm speaking about. That talent should be put into making our people into better people.
We've run out of time, unfortunately, but thank you very much, Sam, Greg, and Terence. Fascinating hour. If you haven't spotted it, this is actually a book launch. If you want to buy the book, which is called Oil Dorado and is number 7, you can buy it on Amazon worldwide, £15.95 or $20 US. It's available in all good bookshops. But just before we go, let's go back to how the oil came to Guyana. Let's see the geology of it all, which Sam will enjoy. But thank you all and good night. Over to the Dark Ages, many thousands of years ago.
To understand Guyana's present-day opportunity, we need to travel back through the mists of time to over 250 million years ago, when our world looked very different. The supercontinent of Pangaea was being pulled apart into the landmasses of North America, South America, Eurasia, and Africa. A part of the new ocean that was created is the Guyana Basin. And it is here that the ground was laid for today's exploration success. The Berbice Submarine Canyon, as big as the famous Grand Canyon, provided a highway for sediments flowing into the deeper ocean. Thousands of cubic kilometers of sand were deposited in the Guyana Basin. Some of these sands were destined to become the host rock of the modern-day Liza Field. The reservoir sands were then covered by more than 3,000 meters of sealing muds. Slowly, over millions of years, oil, created by the cooking of marine organic matter, migrated into the porous sandstone.